Hello and welcome to my game analysis of Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. I'm going to be talking about the different elements of game design and how they relate to Skyrim. Okay, so this game was developed by Bethesda Game Studios, who was founded in 2001, and they're based in Rockville, Maryland. They are known for their series Elder Scrolls and then also Fallout, which are major role-playing games. Skyrim specifically was launched in 2011, and just through the years there have been major mod developments from fans to patch the game, fix bugs and such, create additional content. There are entire communities on Reddit, and so that kind of ties into the difference between the game itself and then the game community, or the little g or big G game that James G talks about in our course materials. When reading Ralph Koster's writings in the course materials, his line of games are iconic depictions of patterns in the world immediately reminded me of Skyrim, because Skyrim relates the game content to real world problems like racism and segregation in Windhelm, or the Civil War in Whiterun, and how Whiterun is caught in between and suffers damages from a war that at least the Jarl didn't ever want to enter into. So I'm definitely going to focus on the narrative design of Skyrim the most. I think that that element is the most applicable to Skyrim. So just because there's no singular storyline, so to speak, there is prevalence of the three types of narrative forms that Sebastian Domsch talks about in his writings, specifically dynamic forms with the numerous NPCs and just the continuation of time. So when I was reading his writings, I was definitely thinking of Skyrim, and just how each of those narrative forms is exist throughout the game. Okay. Touching on game design and elements, the first things that come to mind are the game is very magical. It's a high fantasy world. It has majestic music and really good graphics for that time. There's been a lot of technological development since then, but it's definitely been really impressive. There's diverse design of characters, landmarks, cultures with the different Jarls and the different races that exist. The genre of the game, I think, is a mix between action and adventure. There's so much player agency that you can really, it goes both ways. In one of the discussion posts in my class, my fellow student Calvin Townsend had said the delicate balance that designers need to strike between player agency and guided experiences is super important. And he was referencing Crawford's insights on that conversation between maker and player, because it's not necessarily a conversation between the player and the game. The game is a non-existent form. It's created by the maker who is having this conversation. And so the user interface design really helps to maintain that delicate balance where we are guided through the game, but we are given choice. And the choice is simplified to us in a way that keeps us entertained, keeps us connected to the game. And the presentation of feedback in-game comes in all forms. So again, the user interface design, quest markers, map markers, and then just the simple laws of the game. If you break the law, you pay the price, you go to jail, etc. Okay, now on to game story and narrative design. The game is about a character who discovers they are a rare and powerful being, and they are the only one that can hope to successfully defeat the dragons that have returned to Skyrim. The story type, which I thought originally to be sandbox, is actually discovery. It's a discovery narrative, and I believe this is how to pronounce his name, Picucci's definition and description of the discovery narrative really um, encapsulates the gameplay of Skyrim. He even mentions it in his writings, which I thought was neat. Uh, it's a discovery narrative by the microstories told by the NPCs. Um, Certain levels are only revealed after certain conditions are met. But it's also an open world. It's an open map. You don't have to complete the main quest before moving on, which I thought is really neat. The design features that support the storytelling are really summed up in Domsch's narrative forms, the passive, active, and dynamic. So examples would be the loading screens with tips and lore, even artifacts, different cultures and races. That's a really good way to give information to the player without them having to go looking for it. It's presented whether they want the option or not. There's not a ton of cutscenes or QuickTime events, but the intro segment walks the player through basic controls, sets up the culture and lore, especially with the dragon and the history behind that. But also, it's not super important to the game because it can not only be avoided entirely with mods, but you don't have to go through the quest. The active forms are definitely the most prevalent in the game. I think that's kind of the case for a lot of games, but especially with Skyrim. It's an open world exploration when it comes to player actions. Relationship building is definitely a huge one. You can get married, you can form friendships, you can form alliances, and you can have companions that follow you around. Lydia is a great example of that, as much as we love Lydia. And then you can also join guilds, different factions, which ties into moral decisions. So the Thieves Guild, the Dark Brotherhood even, which is a huge play on moral decisions. Either choose to kill them all or to join them and carry out their wishes. And then dialogue trees, last of the active forms, just the different options to interact with NPCs. If you choose a certain dialogue option, you might argue with them, or they might start attacking you, or you can convince them to help you in this way. So that kind of ties into the dynamic forms because just the overall availability of NPCs and the high quality of the NPCs in the game who have jobs and schedules, which is much more advanced than the emptiness of, for example, Oblivion and Morrowind games. It's just, there's a lot more depth to the NPCs in Skyrim. And then the intradiegetic clock, how it's constantly running. There's different phases and months and weeks. You can sleep, you can pass that time. And then there's, of course, certain quests that you can only access at certain times of the day. So you have to beat this person at this time, or else they're at work, or else they're doing something else. So that's for the narrative. The last element that I will brush on is the player experience. And this kind of has to do with emergent gameplay and the emotional connection that players have with Skyrim. So there is a communication between player and game maker, as discussed in Module 2, specifically with the player engagement that Crawford talks about, but the space of possibility as well. It is a purposefully designed system that breeds interactivity, and Salen and Zimmerman talk about that in the Module 2 materials as well. Module 2 materials. The user interface design range that I touched on earlier with quest markers. The journal quests are bullet pointed, so you can see how far you've gone in a quest, what you have to do left. Map keys when it comes to the huge map, and just what towns look like, what holds look like, what bandit camps are symbolized as. That's a big part of that. There are different enemy types, that you can come across. There's safe spaces. Like, you're a lot safer in a city than you are in a forest, unless you've killed a bunch of people and are wanted. But um, now focusing on emergent gameplay, since this game has been out for more than 10 years, mods have really been developed by fans. And another example would be fan art and fan fiction. It's another part of the emergent gameplay. Tons of fan art, tons of fan fiction. When I was younger, I would draw the characters, just sketch them out, and I would even write my own fan fictions, create my own characters, and that was all based on my experience with Skyrim and how much it meant to me. Um, I remember when I would look up fan fiction in the beginning, it was tons of Brynjolf romances, because in game you can't marry Brynjolf. Very ridiculous, but a lot of people really fell in love with the character Brynjolf and wanted to marry him, and so they were writing fan fictions about this character who doesn't exist. But it's another example of that emergent gameplay. And then a big example for me would be the death of followers. So, I would I remember in my first world, I chose to side with Feyendel as opposed to Sven in that beginning, one of the beginning quests that are available to you as you make your way through Riverwood. And he became my follower because after you complete that quest and assist Feyendel as opposed to Sven, he is then allowed to be your partner. And so I would have him as my companion, and I remember for that first world, he followed me everywhere, and I almost created like a connection with him. I call him Buddy, and I'd be like, come on, Buddy, like, let's go fight this bandit camp. And there was one time where I hadn't saved in a while, which is always like the bane of my existence when I play games. I always forget to save my progress, and I had come to this certain fort that I needed to conquer and work through, and Feyendel died amidst the battle, and I found him afterwards, and I was so sad when I realized I couldn't save back to save him without losing all of this progress that I had made. And in the end, I did lose all of that progress and go back. I think I just had to erase my completion of 6 different quest lines or something like that, because it was a big choice. It was a meaningful choice to me. Save my friend or save my progress and what I had accomplished. And in the end, I saved Feyendel, and I then put him as a house carl, or not a house carl. I made him a steward of one of my houses so that he would be far away from any other danger. But yeah, so those are the elements of game design when it applies to Skyrim. And I've really enjoyed my experience with Skyrim. I know a lot of other people can say the same. It's a really in-depth game, and reading through the course materials for this class has really given me a better, more enlightened perspective on a game that I have been playing for years and love dearly. And it's been a really good opportunity to analyze this love that I have for this game.